Hey guys, in the previous part we modeled everything and we set the animation for our dragon. And now we can create all the materials and prepare it for the final renders. A few things you can do first. One of them is the camera passepartout to max, so you can hide what's outside the frame. Change this window to material preview and switch here to the shader editor. Grab the body, add a new material, and let's add different colors to the scales. For this we need a color ramp, get also white noise texture and a vector matte node. Change it to snap, and we need one more node for the vector, UV map. And for the second input, a value node. Change it to 1, and let's connect all the nodes. To make this work, we have to tap into the array UVs, so we can go back to the modifiers, and on the body we have two array modifiers. So let's set on the first one only the V values to 1, but on the second one we can set both values to 1, and we can already see all the colors that are between these two bars. If we change it to constant, it will work with specific colors, but not the gradients between them. We can move the bars to give it more or less of the colors. So just like that, pick the colors you like and how much of them you want. Make it metallic all the way up and increase slightly the roughness. Let's also set the rendering to see better what we are doing with these nodes. We will use cycles for the final renders, but we can also use Eevee to set the materials. So let's enable some of its options. Increase the distance of the ambient occlusion to get more shadow in the corners of the mesh. For the cycles, check if you have GPU. If it's on CPU, just change it. For the viewport, let's set the max samples low to 64. Enable denoise if it's not, and change it to optics. The rendering samples also to 64, later we can level up, but note that it will take more time to render when we increasing these values. We can add an area light to the scene, and let's change to the cycles render here. We are about to use only two lights, and we can place the first one on the side of the camera to get most of the lightning. Place it close to the dragon and make it 2 or 3 times bigger. Increase a bit the power and change the color to have just a little bit of blue. Duplicate it and we can place the second somewhere in front of the camera and behind the dragon to get the rim light or the backlight. This is the light that illuminating the edges from behind. Reduce the power and change the color on this one to have just a little bit of yellow. We can leave them like that for now, but when we're working on the materials we can come back and tweak it to get it right for the final renders. In the World Properties tab, we can turn off the strength. We can also set the color profile. In Blender 4, by default, we are using the new AGX View Transform, but I want to change to standard and increase the look to high contrast to get more saturation of the colors. Disable Simplify to see how it looks with the subdivision modifiers. We can turn it back later if needed. We can change here to the material preview. And let's move on to the next part. The belly also have arrays, and the easiest way is to link the materials so we don't have to create the node setup again. Make it single user material like that, so it doesn't change the body material when we adjust it now. Go to the array modifier and set the UVs to 1. So we have now all the colors from the color ramp and we can tweak them. I will tap into the materials and lower the saturation to all of them. Then reducing the roughness a little bit. We can make in the tubes in the same way. They also have array and we want to keep it, so link the materials and make it single user. For this one I will remove most of the colors and leave only dark blue for now. Reduce the roughness and add yellowish material to get something like a golden bars. We have to tap to the UVs to make the separation between the colors. Adjust the bars as you want it, and let's add one more shader. We can mix them with the mix shader node. Get also emission and plug it to the second input. For the emission, add a color ramp and a layer way node using the facing, so we can make it look more realistic with some shadows around the edges of the tubes. Add a green color and we might have to flip the color bars like that. Then make the black one dark green. We have to separate now the shaders, so add color ramp and copy this setup here with Shift D. Connect everything to the factor input. Using now this color ramp, we can set how much we want. Change it to constant and adjust the white bar so we have a few of these. We can also animate it later, and for this we have to remove this UV map and add a texture coordinate with a mapping. Plug the nose like that, and we can use the X location to offset the emission, and that's how it works. We'll add the keyframes later. For now we can move on with the comp on the back. Add a new material and bring the color ramp. We need also a gradient texture, add the mapping with Ctrl T, and if this shortcut don't work on your end, make sure you enable no triangular add-on from preferences. Plug everything like that. So we have this gradient now from left to right, and we can add whatever colors we like. We can use the location to offset if needed. The rotation values can also be used to set it right. I will reduce the roughness and add a little bit of subsurface. We are using this to make semi-translucent shaders like the skin, for example. We can reduce the red color. These 3 bars below represent the RGB values. Let's push this material further and add some pattern. We can mix the shaders with the mix shader node. Add one more principal BSDF for the second input. Choose whatever color you like. I will pick this dark blue for contrast. And let's add the wave texture there with the mapping and coordinates. We'll use it to tell the mix shader how to mix these 2 materials. Need also a color ramp to control how they're mixing. We have these straight lines now, and if we go to the wave texture settings, we can add distortion and remove the detail, so we can make them curved lines like this. We can touch a few more settings of the wave texture to get it right. I'll stay with this, but you can try different variations if you like. Let's push it even more and bring a bump node there so we can add some variations to the depth. Using the same setup, so just duplicate it with Shift D and plug it to the bump height, then to the normal. If we come closer, we can see some stuff happening already. And we can tweak the color bars to precise it. Reduce the strength. And maybe flip the bars to get this effect. The tail is very simple to do. It's also using arrays, so just duplicate the material and set up the UVs. Only the V values to 1. Adjust the color ramp to get the colors you like. And let's remove the metallic on this one and reduce the roughness. Maybe add back some metallic. For the legs, we will create this shifting colors material first. So grab this part and add a new material. We need a color ramp and a layer weight node using the Fresnel. Plug everything to the base color. Choose the colors you like. Reduce the roughness a bit, and let's also add the Musgrave texture with the mapping and the coordinates. Plug it to the layer weight normal so we can get this pattern. Change the texture to 4D and switch it to hybrid multifractal. We can bring the bars closer to see all the colors. So we added the layer weight to get this nice gradient transition when we move it. For the part inside, we already did something similar, and that's 2 materials, mix it with a wave texture. We can mix the shaders. Just duplicate that one. Change the color and make it metallic. Plug it to the second shader input. Get the wave texture with a mapping and plug them to the factor. Color ramp to control the shaders. And let's play with the wave texture settings to create a simple pattern with a few curved lines. We can use the mapping to precise the pattern location and rotation. We can just link the body material to the clothes. They're both using UVs and we already have the setup there. Just have to set the V's to 1. Before adjusting the material, make sure you click here to make it a single user and don't mess up with the other materials. Pick whatever colors you like, decrease the roughness a bit, and let's start linking the materials to the other parts. Move on to the horns materials. These two are very simple to make, but on the other two we'll spend some time. Let's start with that one first. We have the array, so just duplicate the body material, separate it from the other materials and check the UVs. It's all about colors here, nothing special. We can also get rid of the metallic effect and reduce the roughness to get nice reflections. Maybe tweak the lighting position if needed. We can still tweak the lights to get most of them. Making now the golden material for the curved horns, and that's quite simple. Just add yellowish color, make it metallic and reduce the roughness, that's all. For the antlers we can make this material that resemble wood. Add a new material and bring the color ramp with a wave texture. Add the mapping with Ctrl T. Plug it to the base color and add there the color ramp. We can change the coordinates to normal. Change the wave from bands to rings, the direction to Y, and the profile to triangle. Adjust the settings of the wave texture, starting with the scale. Add more distortion and increase the detail roughness. Set the colors of the first bar to dark brown and make the second one light brown. Reduce the roughness and let's add a bump to the normals to get some depth variations. For this we need again wave texture. Plug it to the height and add the mapping and the texture coordinates. Change the band's direction to Y and precise the scale and some of the other settings. Let's add more details with one more texture and we can mix them here with the mix color node. Get the noise texture and plug the color to the second input using the same texture coordinates. So now with the mix color we can choose how much of each texture we want. For example, if the factor is set to 0 we are using the wave texture only. If it's to 1 we are using the noise texture. And just like that we can set the mix with just a little bit of noise to the wave texture. We can play also with the settings of the noise texture, lower the scale, details up and add more roughness. Let's also reduce the strength of the bump to 0.3. 1 is too much for a bump node. On this one we can add emission and play with the normals to get this effect. So create a new material, add a color ramp, then a layer weight node. We also need a wave texture with the mappings. Plug it to the normal and facing to factor, everything to the base color. We are setting up now the emission shader, so let's get this green color and tweak the bar's position like that. On the wave texture we can add distortion, get the scale right and add some details. Plug the color ramp to the emission color and add just a little bit of strength. And because we are using a layer weight we can get this real nice effect in cycles with this material transition. But if I have to be honest, it's hard to get this shifting in the final renders because it depends on the view's position and stuff like that. It also don't work well in Eevee, but we will be using cycles anyway. So a few more things we can do with the normals, and that's by using a bump node. Get again the wave texture with a mapping, plug it to the height and add a color ramp to control the effect with the bars. We can use Ctrl Shift and click on specific node to isolate it and see only what these nodes are doing. For the wave texture, we can add distortion, adjust the scale, then bring closer the bars to get these engraved curves. We can use one more bump node to add additional layer with details. Connect normal to normal. And just duplicate the setup one more time. Plug it to the height of the bump. Then we have to connect everything to the normal. But let's isolate it first and see what we are doing. Increase the scale to make this effect smaller. You can play with the other settings to get something you like. Reduce the strength of the both bump nodes. Ctrl Shift and click to plug back the principal BSDF so you can see what we just did. The first bump node can be a little bit stronger and maybe tweak some of the settings, but that's the whole node setup for these horns, so just decrease the roughness and we are done here. Moving on to the spikes, and we will use one material for the different colors, then add a pattern variation to a few. Let's first select all of them and move them to their own collection. Move it back to the head collection like that. So you can select now easily all the spikes. Shift click on one of them to add a new material. We need only two nodes for the color variation, and that's a color ramp and an object info node. Using the random output, we can add different colors to separate objects. Link this material to the other selected spikes, and we can see that it's using the color gradient between the bars. With the bars, we can give it more or less of that colors, but we use constant interpolation so we can add specific colors. So add whatever colors you like and reduce the roughness slightly. And if we select now one of these, we can make it single user material and add a few nodes to get the pattern. Get the mix shader and we can add a Voronoi texture on this one to create some dots. Duplicate the BSDF, connect everything and make this one metallic. Color ramp to control the mix, and let's adjust the bars first so you can start seeing the pattern. Change it to constant, coordinates to object, and let's set the scale. Maybe bring back more roughness. Tweak further some of the settings, and we can also use the mapping to offset the location and set the position where we want it. We created the dots pattern and we can just link it to different objects with Ctrl L. One more pattern we can do, and that one is with the wave texture. Add the mapping and the color ramp. Adjust the bars and duplicate the BSDF. Change the color to whatever you like. Add distortion to the wave texture. Tweak in the other settings to get just a few curved lines there, and you can link this pattern to different parts. The other materials are very easy to make, no additional nodes there. For example, the eyes are only black color, with the roughness down and specular all the way up. For the iris, we can tap into the emission and add a green yellowish color with a 0.5 strength. We can copy the color with Ctrl C and paste it to the base color with Ctrl V. Just link the materials here, make it single user, then change the color to blue and copy to the emission. Link it to the other eyes and let's create a material for this part. It's only a color with a roughness low, and we will add a coat with a weight all the way up. For this part we can link the materials, make it single user and set up the UVs as we have a race modifier. It's all about the colors here. Then reduce the metallic and the roughness. The tongue is red color. Lower the roughness and increase the specular, using again the subsurface. In the previous versions of Blender, the weight slider was very strong, but now we can just increase it all the way up. Link it to this part and let's create the teeth material. It's a white color with the roughness down and specular up, that's it. We can select them all and move them to their own collection like we did with the spikes. Just organize them and make them easier to select all of them and stuff like that. Link it to all the teeth and let's add material for the other curves. Just a simple material for now, later we can push it further with some emission shaders. So we created all the materials for our dragon, but before we render the final thing we can make a test animation first, just to see how all the things coming together and precise everything. In the output tab we can choose where the animation to be saved from here. Change the format to FFmpeg video. Under encoding, change container to MPEG-4 and the quality to perceptually lossless. Ctrl F12 is a shortcut to render all the frames and make the final animation, but this takes a lot of time and we want to test it first. So in the viewport shading we can enable the scene lighting and the world settings. Scroll back the top bar and here under view we can find this option viewport render animation, which will render only what we see in the viewport and it's really fast. You can see here how fast changing the frames. It takes a minute or two to create this animation, and what we can do with it is to check if there are any issues and how everything works. For example, we can see how the horns are getting into the body here, so we can tweak this. Maybe the comp on the back is too big and stuff like that. So I'll go back now to the dragon and start adjusting all these points, like fixing the position of the dragon so it's not intersecting with the body and anything else we detected on the test animation. For final touch we'll create the whiskers around the nostrils and set some nodes animations. So just add a curve, add a depth and change the bevel to profile, adjust it in edit mode, duplicate it for the other side and tap again to edit mode to adjust it. Pair them to some of the head parts so they stay together. Add a taper object and enable map taper like we did in the previous video. For the animation, I want it to start growing once the dragon stops moving, so we can extend the animation with a few more frames. Then go to the end and add a keyframe to the end mapping. Few frames before the dragon stops moving, we can add another keyframes. So take down the end mapping and press I to add it. We can enable simplify to see what we just made. Link the animation data to the other curve. We can also grab the empty that offset the comp animation and extend the last keyframe to the end of the animation so it's still moving when the dragon stops. Adjusting in the other curves to match with the new animation offset. Let's animate in the emission shader of the tubes. Go to the beginning of the animation and add a keyframe for the location. Then go to the end, offset the location on the X, positive or negative depending on the direction you want to be, and add another keyframe. I will move some of the keyframes after the animation so they keep moving and don't stop or slow down at the end. Also one more thing we can do for the comp on the back, and that's adding a few small dots using the mix shader and the Voronoi texture. We need emission, color ramp and Voronoi with a mapping. Change the coordinates to object and plug the distance, then the color ramp. Just kill the texture and pick the emission color. Maybe add a little bit of strength. Adding simple material for the whiskers and that's it. So here is where I end up the recording. But before the final animation, I made a few more updates to the dragon and I wanted to show what exactly I did for these who follow this tutorial along and want to get the same result as mine. For the comp on the back, I had to change the coordinates to UV, so the pattern stays still when the dragon moves. For this you have to select all the mesh in edit mode and unwrap it. On these horns I also switched to UV to have better results for the animation, and I also changed the color ramp to B-spline. If it's constant on linear we have this effect, but when we switch it to B-spline we can get this really nice glowing around the edges. For some of the curves I added patterns with emission. This one is with a wave texture, and this one is using Voronoi texture with a dots pattern. Here is only a color ramp with a gradient texture, plug it to the emission. I also added a weld modifier to the curved horns. Before the array was like that, but we can see here the edges. So I added the weld after the array modifiers, and that's welded all the mesh. So I had to move the first array below the weld with just a little bit of distance. Let me show you and the lightning setup I stay with. I added one more light below just to fill some of the shadows. When you have the render, you can go to the compositing tab and add a glare node with these settings to get the glowing effect. You have to enable use nodes first. In Blender 4 we can get this glare in the viewport, and you can enable it from the viewport shading tab. For the final renders I'm using 128 rendering samples, and I double up the resolution to 200. Render as separate images, can be PNG or TIFF. Once I get these images, I can go to the video editing and add them all as image sequence, adjust the settings if needed, and create the clips like that. So that was everything I did with the dragon, and I hope that helps. That is in the final part of this tutorial, so thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.